All right, let's jump right into one of the most important chapters in the entire New Testament, Matthew 16. And I'm not kidding, this isn't just another story. It's like the central hinge that the whole narrative swings on. It's where everything, identity, mission, and the real true cost of it all just collides in one absolutely unforgettable conversation. And right smack in the middle of this chapter is this incredible puzzle. You've got a man who gets a revelation, a truth downloaded straight from heaven, and he's praised for it. And then, literally minutes later, he gets hit with some of the harshest language Jesus ever uses. How on earth does that happen? That's the question we're going to try and unpack here. So, to really get the power of the big moment, we have to start where the chapter starts, in this atmosphere of tension and conflict. You can feel it. Jesus is being constantly tested, and honestly, his own followers are just struggling to keep up. So you have the religious leaders, the Pharisees and Sadducees. They come up to Jesus and they demand a sign, some big, flashy miracle from the sky to prove who he is. And you can just feel the frustration in Jesus' reply. He basically says, look, you guys can look at a red sky and know a storm is coming, but you are completely blind to the most important thing happening in all of human history right in front of your faces. A little later, he tells his disciples, hey, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. And you get this moment that is, well, it's pretty funny, actually. They immediately start whispering to each other, oh no, he's mad because we forgot to pack lunch. And Jesus has to stop them and say, guys, seriously? Remember the thousands I just fed with a couple of loaves? I'm not talking about actual bread. And then the light bulb goes on. The yeast, it was a metaphor for the toxic, corrupting teachings that were spreading through the religious leaders. Okay, so all of that is the lead up to the main event, the heart of the chapter. Jesus takes his disciples on a little road trip about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee to a very, very specific place. He's about to ask a question that is going to define his entire movement. And listen, the location here is everything. Caesarea Philippi was basically the capital city of pagan worship. It had temples to the Greek god Pan, a massive temple where people worshiped Caesar himself as a god, and towering over this whole scene was this giant rock formation with a dark cave, a cave that was literally called the Gates of Hades, because people believed it was an entrance to the underworld. It is against this backdrop, with all these competing claims to power, that Jesus decides to ask his question.
He eases into it. He starts with a safe question, kind of a general poll. He asks, so, what's the word on the street? Who are people saying I am? It's a smart way to just get the lay of the land.
And, the answers that come back are all really respectful. People think he's a great prophet. Maybe John the Baptist raised from the dead, or the legendary Elijah. These are all huge compliments, but they all miss the mark. They see his power, sure, but they're completely missing his true identity. And then Jesus drills down and makes it personal. Okay, but what about you? Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter, in this flash of pure divine insight, just blurts out the answer that changes everything. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Think about it. In this city full of dead gods and a human emperor pretending to be divine, Peter declares that Jesus is the true king, the Son of the living God. And Jesus tells him, bingo. But you didn't figure that out on your own. That came straight from my Father in heaven. And Peter's incredible answer? Well, it just unlocks everything. It opens the floodgates for Jesus to start laying out these monumental promises about what he's about to build. This is where the mission really starts to take shape. Now you have to picture this. When Jesus says, you are Peter, which means rock, and on this rock I will build my church, they weren't just hearing a clever metaphor. They were physically staring at that giant rock cliff face, the place they called the Gates of Hades. Jesus is making an unbelievable visual point. See that? I'm going to build my new community right on the doorstep of what you consider to be hell itself. And this just brilliantly illustrates the mission. He promises the gates of hell won't overcome his church, but in the original language, the grammar implies something way more active. See, gates are defensive. The picture here isn't a church cowering and hiding from attack. No way. It's the church on the offense, storming the strongholds of death and darkness and winning. And this new community, this church, it's built on a couple of really cool ideas. The word for church, ecclesia, didn't mean a religious building with a steeple. It was a term for a citizen assembly, a group with the authority to make real decisions. And the keys? They weren't literal keys for some pearly gates. Keys were a common symbol for delegated authority. So Jesus is basically creating a brand new community of citizens with the authority to act on his behalf. So, everybody's feeling pretty good, right? They're at this incredible peak of revelation and promise. And then, wham, the story takes a sharp, shocking turn. The moment of absolute crystal clarity is immediately followed by a profound misunderstanding. Right after this high point, Jesus starts explaining what being the Messiah really means. It means going to Jerusalem, suffering, being killed, and then being raised on the third day. But Peter's brain is stuck on his own version of a Messiah, the conquering hero who's going to kick out the Romans. So Peter got an A+ on who Jesus is, but a total F on what Jesus came to do. He wanted the glory of the kingdom without the suffering of the cross.
And so Peter actually pulls Jesus aside and scolds him, saying, "Never, Lord, this will never happen to you." And Jesus' reply is just stunning. He looks at his number one guy, the rock, and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Whoa, why so harsh? Because Peter, in his good-hearted attempt to protect Jesus, was actually voicing the same temptation Jesus heard in the wilderness, the temptation to take the easy way out, to find glory without the suffering. He became a scandalon, a trap, a stumbling block in the path.
And from that intense, dramatic rebuke, Jesus pivots to his final and maybe his most difficult teaching of the day. He makes it crystal clear what following him, the real Messiah, is actually going to cost.
He turns to all of his followers, not just Peter, and he lays out the non-negotiable terms of service. After shattering Peter's vision of a glorious kingdom, Jesus defines the true path. It's not about power and glory. It's about denial, death, and then life. And the words he uses here would have been absolutely shocking to them. The Greek word for deny himself is the exact same word used later to describe Peter swearing up and down that he never even knew Jesus. So the call is to deny yourself with that same level of intensity. And the cross? This wasn't some piece of jewelry. To a first-century person, a cross was a brutal Roman instrument of torture and execution, period. It meant the death of your own will, your own plans, your own agenda. So what this chapter shows us is this clear, logical progression, a spiritual order of operations, if you will. You can't skip the steps. First, you have to settle the identity question. Who is Jesus? Only after you get that revelation can you even begin to understand and operate in the authority of his kingdom. But you can never truly use that authority until you have counted and accepted the profound personal cost of following a crucified king. Which leaves us right here. At the end of the day, this entire chapter, with all of its drama, its incredible highs and shocking lows, it all boils down to that one question Jesus asked back in Caesarea Philippi. It's not just a question for Peter. It's a question for every single one of us. Because how you answer it, who do you say I am? Well, that changes absolutely everything